What is up, Teach Better family? My name is Jeff. You know that guy. That's Chad. Oop, you're this side. That's Chad. He's been here with you the last couple of days. I'm kind of taking over today because we want to put Chad on the hot seat and talk from the lens of an administrator around mastery learning in a classroom. I'm super excited to dive into this and share and get Chad sharing all the things that we've experienced with administrators and how we can properly support educators in our buildings and in our district that are utilizing whether it's a grid method or mastery learning in general, but we're going to focus a little more on the grid method today and diving into those questions. If you're here with us live, drop into the comments. Let us know. Do you have any questions? What's going on? And this is good. I don't care whether you're actually administrator position or teacher. Drop in the comments. Let us know what's on your mind. Let us know what questions we can throw at Chad. We are live right now on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Twitch, and on LinkedIn. So if you need anything, drop in there. Let us know. And we'll be back in like 17 seconds. All right, what is up, Teach Better family? We are back. Chad, it is day 3 of this 3-day series, Mastery Learning Personalized for Your Success. You on Tuesday ran an awesome session with Blair, building a grid from start to finish. Yesterday, you took us on a journey of learning and exploration when it comes to classroom management from the classroom side of things, and how do we actually take these concepts and these practices that are built into this framework, and how do we make them work for us in our classrooms and all the different things that our classrooms face. Today, we are talking about how do administrators support this, and how do administrators support the teachers that are trying something new and going into to mastery learning and into the grid method. And I think I want to know, as I just said that, I thought to myself, you know what? There's lessons here. Even if your teachers aren't going into a grid method or mastery learning, there's gonna be a lot of lessons here today that are just good for anybody if you're supporting a teacher who's doing different things. So I'm going to make a note there.
Absolutely, yeah.
Chad, we were talking just a little bit before we got on. Something that's really cool. Why I wanted to be here with you today is we've been on this journey for almost 8 years now of working with teachers and school districts all over the country and supporting administrators who were supporting those teachers. And so this is something that we've had a ton of conversations with or around, and a lot of work with our internal team to create the right answers, the right supports, the right resources for administrators who are on this position. So I'm excited to sort of throw some questions at you this morning and dive into it. As people are jumping in the comments, Chad, how are you feeling about the last 2 days that you've been here without having to put up with me on screen, and the questions that have been coming, the way our community has reacted? Like, give me your gut feeling right now on day 3.
These sessions like these are always super energizing and refreshing for me. I'm not on this screen as much as I probably should be. So when I get to kind of come back and talk directly to our network outside of the school setting or outside of a district setting, it's always really exciting because I almost feel like I'm coming back to our home team, our home base, and like feeling not only the love, but like the intrigue, the interest, because everyone coming in to ask these questions is here because they want to be here, they want to grow, and they want to learn. And that's honestly what Teach Better is all about. Well, one of the things you actually said was that, this session, even though we're talking about administrators, is also critical for educators, because one of the most common questions I get, because Teach Better is not just PD that happens when a school brings us in. That's when a teacher takes the grid method course by themselves and they're the only teacher in their district. Sometimes I'll get an email, or you'll get an email, or Ray or Katie or Dave will get an email, and they'll say, my principal said this when they did a walkthrough, or they didn't quite understand something. And a lot of times it's us coaching teachers on how to explain what's happening in their classroom in a way that their administrator will understand. So I think a lot of the questions I'm excited for us to talk through today kind of go from both sides. It's not only how can we help administrators better understand, execute, scale the grid method in a school or in a district, but how can we help teachers and educators navigate the waters of being an innovator or an innovator in their own classrooms and doing things that might look a little bit different than their administrators used to.
So I'm glad you went there. I was going to go there later on in my some of the questions that I had. I'm going to go there right now, though. Let's go there first, actually. And this is from the as an educator, a classroom teacher, or whoever it might be, whatever your role is, that is trying to implement this, trying to make these changes. You hit it right on the head where you said it looks different, which can be really scary for folks on the outside who don't necessarily know what you're doing, understand it. What are the sort of the steps, and not necessarily in order, but the key steps, key things that a classroom teacher should be thinking about, maybe the actions they should be taking as far as setting their support team up, their coaches, their specialists, their administrators, to best support and understand what's going on in their classroom? Can you give us some of the tips, some of the things that you can go the tips plus the pitfalls to avoid, whatever you want to go here?
Sure. Yeah. So the biggest thing is to give them a heads up that you're making changes at all. Honestly, I think a quick conversation with your administrator that you're trying something new, that you might be working out kinks if they stop by, is a great way to start that conversation before these things end up being misunderstood later on. So if I go to my administrator and say, hey, I just took this really neat course, I think it solves a lot of the issues I'm having in my classroom. Here's why I'm making some of these changes, but it might look a little bit different. Here's some of the things you might see in my classroom. They might not memorize the whole conversation you just had, but that's going to then be in the back of that administrator, that instructional coach's mind, so that when they walk through your classroom, they go, that's right. Susie was trying that new thing. So they're still working up some of those kinks. If that conversation doesn't happen, now all of a sudden there's a lot more questions than answers, right? So it's hard to support something you don't understand. And that goes for parents, that goes for administrators, that goes for instructional coaches. So if I don't understand what I'm seeing, or that something I'm seeing is going to be different, I might just assume that, like, wow, there's kids moving around and it doesn't really seem like there's a single lesson going on. This is kind of weird. And now the entire conversation, instead of being supportive, is about explaining what's actually happening. So if you preload that conversation of, this is what you're going to see in my classroom, then it makes it a lot easier for the additional conversations to be around progressing, improving, and supporting the work, instead of questioning it or not understanding it and clarifying it.
So I want to note that, and you touched on it, like that is also really important on the stakeholder side, right? The parent side and stuff like that. Sure. As well. Super important. Staying on this sort of same track. So, what are some of the key sort of, hey, heads up, this is going to look different, things that we have found over the years are most important to make sure administrators know? So teachers watching, these are the things you want to make sure are definitely bullet points in that conversation. Administrators watching, these are things, if that conversation ever happens, that you now know are potentially in a good method classroom. What are the key things of, like, hey, when you walk by my classroom, like you kind of mentioned, kids might be moving around. That's not a bad thing. That's part of the thing. What are the other pieces that, like, as an administrator, I might walk in, peek in, ask questions, and be like, well, that seems like it's either chaos or not correct, or I don't understand, right?
Yeah, every administrator is going to be a little bit different, but there is a general consensus, like, that's kind of outdated, that, like, compliance is engagement, right? Sometimes administrators equate a quiet classroom with a productive classroom, or a quiet classroom with an engaged classroom. And based on all the research I've ever looked at, those two things are not necessarily synonymous. There can be a super quiet, super docile, super compliant classroom that is completely disengaged, right? And we've actually seen this. You get a kid with their head down in the back, they're glazing over. It's super well controlled, and it might be a good, like, well-managed classroom in terms of behavior, but there's not a whole lot of learning or engagement happening. And when you go into a grid method classroom, all of a sudden you see kids moving around, kids organically collaborating. More importantly, kids doing a bunch of different things at the same time. And so a principal might go, wow, what is going on here? So it's very critical. It's very critical that the teacher is able to explain why a student is doing what they're doing, showing them that I am progress monitoring where these students are. I know what they're working on and why they're working on it. And this is not mismanaged. It is freedom for them to learn at their own pace that I have structured in the back on the back end. So if you don't show the principal or the administrator or the instructional coach the back end, right? If you don't show them that you're progress monitoring, that you know what kids are doing, that you're showing them how you're intervening when kids need it, or how you're supporting organic collaboration in the classroom, it's going to feel very unorganized because the context for what's happening isn't there. And that kind of goes hand in hand. If you've had the conversation with your administrator or your coach before they walk in the room, and you can give them that direct context, most principals are blown away when they see the progress monitor. Most principals, if it's explained correctly, and you can say, guess what? I'm differentiating not day by day, not week by week, but minute by minute in my classroom. Here is where every student's at. Here's exactly what they're working on, and here's exactly what they need. There is no administrator or coach in the world that wouldn't be impressed or supportive of that idea. But if they don't understand that those things are happening, that positive quickly becomes questions or probing concerns about what they're witnessing in the room.
Yeah. Whereas I'm distinctively remember, I think it was in Ohio somewhere, walking into, I think it was a third grade classroom, and we talked with the superintendent who had went out to recess with them, followed their class in, and not only did he know that the teacher knew that, right, exactly where they were and what they were working on, all the students went as well, right? And so instead of what looked like chaos where they all went to different spots in the room, they didn't all go back to their desks. They went, because some of them were going to pick up packets, some of them were going to stations, whatever, where that could look like they just all went nuts when they came inside, versus administrator that knew that and could see, oh, they're all grabbing exactly what they need, and now they're engaged. And someone commented about their classroom was rarely quiet last quarter. And I'm recalling times of us walking through the hallways, and some of the things that we love the most when we're walking through, and it's kind of a loud hallway. Not loud like disruptive or crazy, but like you hear like conversations and engagement happening within a classroom. And then we walk by somewhere, you'd be like, okay, that's a quiet classroom that looks engaged. That's definitely not an engaged classroom. And you're talking about the kid with their head down. I walking by and you're like, well, there's 4 kids in the back with their heads down. When you were teaching me all these things early on, and I think that's really important. So I love that direction. And we're getting some comments I want to look at as well. So I think a big one is that you touched on it, like compliance is not necessarily engagement, or I'm sorry, obedience isn't necessarily engagement. So moving in more into this as I'm learning. So maybe I've taken the steps as a teacher and as an admin, I'm learning about it. I have a decent enough understanding that I know my teacher's classroom is going to be different. It's going to look and feel different, but maybe I'm still a little nervous about whether this is going to work and stuff. And, the grid method really is not, in mastery learning in general, actually most things, but the grid method specifically is not like a press play and go type thing, right? Teachers are going to tinker with it. They're going to play around. They're going to make the adjustments for a while before they figure out how this framework really fits with you. And I think that's one of the best things about the grid method is that it's flexible, it's customizable, it's personalizable to make it best for the teacher. So knowing that, as the admin who maybe has some little concerns still, maybe doesn't have full belief in it, but trusts this teacher to do the things right, how do I best support this teacher who is tinkering around, who is possibly going to make some mistakes and fail and slip up and have some struggles? How do I best support them as they're going into this new venture of trying to implement this?
I think one of the biggest things I talk with administrators about is because a lot of administrators have a lot of pedagogical and instructional expertise that they can share and support to teachers. And there is no aspect of the grid method that is a new idea. It's an amalgamation and a framework built on best practices. So a lot of administrators go, I don't know about the grid method, so I don't know how to support this. But if they stop before saying that and say, I do know how to support formative assessment. I do know how to support intervention. I know how to support small group work. I know how to support active learning. Like if you look at the components of the grid method, if I'm an administrator, I can support any of those things individually in the context of the framework in which they're being executed. So instead of going, I don't know about the grid method, so I'm shy about giving feedback, having a conversation with, I noticed when you were signing students off or checking them off, it was taking you a little long. Have you thought about more targeted assessments? That is an assessment conversation. That's not necessarily a grid method conversation. Or, hey, I noticed that there were some management things going on. Have you thought about systems or routines you could put in place to help calm that down or keep this kid on task, or maybe some SEL practices, or like there are so many other aspects that go into the grid method that even if you're not an expert or you're not super familiar with the framework itself, if you focus on the execution of instructional practices and the best practices within the framework versus the framework, it can be really kind of freeing as an instructional support position to go, oh, I do this all day. I can help the teacher. And then it becomes focusing on execution of instructional practices versus are you doing the grid method well or not? And that's actually something we see at the building and the district level a lot too, is the conversation goes from, are you executing instruction well, to are you doing the grid method, yes or no? And once you put a big name on it as the big idea, you create something that's either good or bad, going well or not going well, versus going, here's what's going well in the classroom within the framework. Here are the components of that and how we can support them. But it's really dangerous to go, you're doing the grid method and it's one thing versus you're implementing a framework that includes multiple best practices, which we can improve on or support or help you with.
Yeah, and I think that goes to, and we've had conversations so often with administrators who are, whether it's a grid method or any of the other things that we work with.
It's not a grid method thing, yeah.
Right, but it always comes down to one of the most common questions one of the things that we focus on is to your point, not are they doing this well, but what is the purpose for us implementing this either in the classroom and or district wide, school wide, whatever? What are those key components? Like what do we want our classrooms to look like? And that's what you're talking about here is like, it's not we need our classrooms to run the grid method. It's we need our classrooms to do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. And the grid method is a tool that is hopefully allowing us to do that. But the focus is on the practices, the outcomes, the solutions we're trying to put in place, not, to your point, not the name that happens to be all across those things.
Yeah, the framework is a means to the instructional end you want to see. The other thing that we always start with, like we'll do strategic planning and in consultation with schools and districts. And I never start those conversations, or any of our coaches ever start those conversations with, do you want to do the grid method? Those conversations start with, what do you want to see consistently in your classrooms across every building, every classroom in the district? What are those pillars of instruction that you want to see? And if the grid method can make those things happen easier or give a tool to help teachers execute, awesome, that might be a great solution. But the same thing goes is if those pillars or those non-negotiable instructional outcomes you want to see can happen without the grid method, that's great too. A lot of times I've even told teachers, listen, if you can do all the stuff I just said without the grid method, more power to you. It's not about the grid method being there or not. It's about our students' needs being met. And are we creating environments that meet the needs of all learners?
So I want to take this next question. This is one that we get a lot from teachers, but I want to take it from an admin perspective of looking at, maybe I've talked to some other folks that are either running the grid method or have teachers running it, or maybe I've seen within videos or posts or whatever. And I'm sitting here going, my school is maybe not as well funded or not as advanced with ed tech and things of that nature. How do I support my team? How do I help my teachers implement something like this when we don't have maybe all the resources, maybe not the tech in our classroom, maybe not the flexible seating and the open spaces and these things that I hear are really important for this type of learning environment? How do I approach this? Does this mean that I can't do this? Does this mean that we're not going to be able to do it as well? Does this mean that that my teachers are basically set up to fail?
Yeah, I mean, you know this because we've been in the classrooms, but we've literally seen this run with zero tech, and we've seen this run 1-to-1. So in terms of like tech is not a requirement. It's a nice benefit if you have it, right? There are none of the instructional practices within the grid method that are 100% dependent on tech. It can make things more efficient. It can make things a little bit easier. But the same thing goes with a teacher who has a prepackaged curriculum versus a teacher who has to make their entire curriculum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to both of those teachers, one might see that curriculum as a huge benefit because they don't need to create everything. But another teacher might hate that curriculum because now they have less freedom. The same thing goes with a teacher who has to create their entire curriculum. One teacher might go, I have to make everything. It takes me a lot of time. But another one might go, I love the freedom because I can do what my kids need best. And that's not being dictated to me. So a lot of times there are no like limits in terms of the environments in which this can be beneficial because of the fact that it can work with any curriculum, any amount of resources. And we've seen that. I mean, we had a question in the comments about how do I do this with no chairs? Well, we see flexible seating and kids on the floor all the time. Mm-hmm. We've also seen kindergarten classes where it's station-based, like center-based, where it's all manipulatives and hands-on type of learning opportunities for students to do. So I really can't say that there's a limit based on resources to whether you can or cannot do the grid method or mastery learning. I will, however, say there are certain tools that can help make things more efficient, maybe easier if they're implemented correctly.
Yeah, I can't just say that she actually still finds herself going back to using less tech versus now that she has one-to-one because she was building it. And I tell stories a lot of times when I speak to educators stuff about a classroom that we went into that's zero tech. For someone who actually struggled with the idea of trying to utilize that cart that they got one day a week and eventually said, you know what, I'm dealing with this no tech. And you and I were like, wow, like that's how that's supposed to run. And he has zero tech, like literally nothing, at a chalkboard. And
to that point, something we've said since day one, going all the way back 7-8 years at this point, something we've always said is that teachers in buildings and schools need to plan to execute with the resources they have, not the resources they want. For example, if you only get a cart once a week, now after COVID, this may not be as much of an issue because most schools are kind of up to speed on that, but we still have schools that don't have one-to-one and things like that. But if you only have a cart once a week, maybe don't plan all the stuff to be on computers in your grid, right?
Sure. Exactly.
Plan for the resources you have, not the ones you want or hope to have or only get sometimes.
I'm going to go to, you mentioned this and saw a comment earlier, I think it was Stacy mentioned about how her administrator is used to witness and freedom in classrooms because she has flexible seating. And you use the word freedom in there as well. And we see this sometimes with teachers moving in this, that can be difficult of giving the students a little more freedom, a little more control. From an administrator perspective, that can also be very scary of breaking away from what your initial plans were and the things you put in place. And maybe there's not a ton of pain in our, we're feeling pretty good about stuff, but this teacher of mine now wants to try this thing and I've got to give him or her a lot of freedom. This is more of, I guess, like a personal headspace thing. Like, how do I get past this idea of the fear of giving my teacher or teachers a little more freedom to maybe, to change the way that they're doing their classrooms running, to give their students more freedom as well? How do I get past this fear as an administrator that I might lose control because I'm allowing my teachers to have a little too much control or freedom in their classrooms?
I don't want to oversimplify this answer, but use the data that you're getting from the classroom. Be okay with giving a week or 2 weeks of experimentation to a teacher and then go, how did it go? How did it feel? What were the results? What are we seeing? And start that conversation early. I totally understand that fear in terms of letting people go and trailblaze, but if you're never willing to do that as an administrator, like, you're never going to see that progress. And we've actually worked with a lot of districts that have very little pain, or they're doing pretty well and they don't have a ton of growth, where they don't want to rock the boat. Like, they don't want to get parents all up in arms. They don't want to get whoever, right? But there's also a point where we still have a responsibility to improve instruction when we know there are better things to do. I think one of the hardest things about education is that we're serving the communities that we work in. And there are times when those communities are used to an archaic, broken model that we know better, so we should do better about. So one of the things that we see a lot is the fear of changing the status quo from a social PR kind of community standpoint. The fear of that butting up against instructional progress to what we know is best for kids and what the research says, right? And I think we have a professional responsibility from an administrative standpoint and from an educator standpoint that when we know better, we should do better, regardless of if it's what the parents experienced in their education or what the stakeholders experienced in their education or what the teachers and the administrators experienced in their education. If we know better, we should do better. So really having those conversations about we know this is what's best for kids and being willing to go, we're going to try this, but we're going to monitor it. We're going to see what the data looks like. And we have some great teachers that have had these conversations. And the principal goes, hey, this seems kind of crazy. And the teacher goes, but look at the growth I'm getting. And then, then all of a sudden the whole conversation changes. Yeah, your classroom's a little loud, but Johnny increased his score by 50% this quarter. So like, we're okay with that. Like, I guess that's my biggest thing in terms of what does it take? Be willing to have the hard conversations and look at the data. If something's working, keep doing it. If it's not working, figure out why to improve it. So I think it's just about stepping back and going, being willing to fail beautifully, I think is really, really important for administrators. And giving teachers the space to be willing to fail beautifully is really, really important too. Because we have also seen teachers fall flat on their face when they try this the first time, and it doesn't go well because there's a couple things they got wrong, or they didn't reach out to us when they had questions and they just kind of tried to trudge through. And then they kind of come to us and we help them and we support them, and all of a sudden they fix a couple little things and it's off to the races and they're never going back, and they start to see amazing growth. But if we don't give the space for teachers to try new things and just be willing to let them struggle and flounder and fail in a productive way, we're never going to see that progress that we need to in our schools and our districts.
Yeah, and I think if we don't give them that grace and they aren't aware that we are giving them that, we're willing to have conversations that are just for the purpose of progress, not for the purpose of discipline or whatever, they're less likely to actually go for it and really put everything into it and therefore see that success. And I think that's really key. I want to keep kind of going down this route. You mentioned it and you kind of said a little bit in there, but now taken to like from an administrative perspective to the community and stakeholders, because you kind of touched on that. And we've had a lot of experience with this too, right? Similar. So, and I know, similar to a teacher, obviously, like now it's from administrator out to the community, specifically in the kind of the picture you painted of like, our school does pretty well. We don't really want to rock the boat. Parents are happy with us. They think we're a good school. We have good teachers. Like we got, and I'm afraid that if a few of my teachers or all my teachers, whatever, start trying this, parents are going to start calling me going, why are you changing stuff? Like it's not broken. Don't fix it. This type of stuff. How do I, as an administrator, whether I'm a building principal or assistant principal, or even a coach or a superintendent or whatever, how do I make sure, and what are the things that I should be sharing? How do I make sure that we are communicating and communicating the right things to our stakeholders that this is going to look potentially even more foreign to, who may not understand necessarily and see the best practices that are built into the framework and the pedagogical stuff, but don't feel like we should be changing? How do I set that up so that that's one less stressor on me and obviously on my teaching staff? That's kind of a big loaded question, but
yeah. So this goes back a little bit about not giving the framework, making the framework or the initiative the focus. If you just say teachers are doing grids, parents, all of a sudden, if a parent doesn't like it, grid's bad, and teachers who aren't doing grid are good. You're creating dichotomy when there should be none. You're creating a this or situation. So like from a PR standpoint, you want to focus on, we are personalizing learning and differentiating more effectively with self-paced and mastery learning in our classrooms. And one of the things, if you're a teacher, an administrator, or a central office person, one of the things I always did if these conversations came up is a parent would go, why aren't you teaching, right? Like the idea that like teaching only happens if the teacher's in front of the room and so helping parents see that students are getting more one-on-one attention, more time to learn, more active learning, and more engagement in the classroom is critical. And the way you articulate that to a stakeholder is very, very simple. I would always do this with funneled questions. I would always say, hey, okay, I understand that you might not understand what's happening in the classroom, but let me ask you a few questions so we can kind of identify where you think the issue might be. Would you like your son or daughter to have more or less time on assignments? More time, of course. Would you like them to be able to retake assessments if they learn a little bit more after they take it the first time and be able to show further mastery? Absolutely. Would you like them to have more or less time one-on-one with the teacher and get more or less time with the teacher? Well, I want them to have more time with the teacher. Yes, yes, yes. Great. So I'm funneling these questions going, you agree with this philosophically. You are agreeing with the aspects of everything we're doing. Would you like the teacher to be more aware of what your student needs on a minute-to-minute basis in the classroom? Absolutely. I want them to know as much as possible about my student. Awesome. So because you said yes to all those questions, changing any of the things that you want to see change would actually stop those things from happening. So because you support those practices, I think it's in our best interest if we continue working at this and improving the individual concerns you have with the teacher. So like if I'm an administrator, breaking down those barriers from the big picture of grid or mastery versus not grid or not mastery to, do you want your kid to have their needs met? Yes or no? No parent in the world is going to say no to those questions. None. Yeah. Now, there's a few that just want the bumper sticker on their car and like whatever gets them an A, but those are the wrong questions anyway, right? Like that's a whole separate issue. When it's worrying about is their student getting what they need, there may be things that can be improved in the classroom, maybe the intervention, maybe the pullout, maybe the small group. There might be things you can improve, but it's not about removing everything so that we can go back to a passive, teacher-centered, less engaged, less student-centered instructional model because my kid didn't complain about that because they didn't have to work or learn in the classroom. Because this can make students uncomfortable because they've had to work and learn more than ever before. They can't be passive participants or passengers in the classroom. They have to be active drivers of the learning.
Yeah, I'm reminded of it was years ago now, but I'm reminded of a district that implemented and went a little ahead of schedule based on what we were telling them to do because teachers were rocking and some parents were angry and we had to switch and the school continued to use the grid method, but they weren't allowed to call it the grid. And teachers didn't mind it, and the parents didn't mind.
Yes,
like
I remember having to take a flight.
You had to go to like pitchfork meeting with all with the parents with pitchforks, basically like ready to burn you. But like, and literally we shifted because they did what you were saying, right? They created this grid, good bad thing versus focusing on what the changes were going, and we actually ended up continuing to implement, but not calling it the grid method, and teachers no longer had an issue because that's what they knew. So like breaking it down, as you say, is what allows them to realize like, look, it's not about this thing we're using. It's about the things we're doing to better support your students. Got some questions popping in here. One question is, would you say that the progress monitoring piece would be the key to showing that this can work, specifically from a teacher sharing this to admin? And so from an admin perspective, is that one of the pieces I should be looking at? Is that like a key piece, Chad, to showing them? We talk about the data, but like we also talk about like coming in and seeing where they're at and stuff. Like, what do you think are those key pieces?
I think progress monitoring is a keystone of understanding where your students are. So progress monitoring, in my opinion, is the transcription or the translator from what the teachers planned to what the students are doing in the classroom. So to me, like the progress monitors, like the Google Translate between the admin and the teacher for this is why what's happening in my classroom is happening. But then also being aware as an administrator, how the educator is using that progress monitoring on a moment-to-moment basis in the classroom becomes critical to understanding. Remember, the progress monitoring isn't going to be like numerical data, and it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be sharing scores and things like that. It should just be monitoring the progress of the students on the mastery progression that you've created. So this is an indicator, and that is how you know what interventions, what supports, and what progress your students are going to be making. Who needs to be pulled, who needs to be intervened with, who needs to work ahead, who can partner and answer questions. All of those things are transcribed. I kind of see that as like the Rosetta Stone for what's happening in a grid method classroom, right? Like it's like the transcription device that goes, this is why all these things are happening. And there are times that if you know you're having a walkthrough, I meant to mention this earlier, be very explicit every day about how you're and why you're using each component of the framework. So if you're going to put your progress monitor up, before you start your kids doing their grid work, make sure you reflect on that progress and show them where they are and what they're about to be working on. Make sure you're doing that housekeeping. So if you write your goals at the end of the class for the next day, make sure at the next day you go, hey, pull out your goals that you wrote at the end of the learning session from yesterday, reflect on those goals. Remember, this is where you should be. If you're behind, this is what you should be doing. If you're ahead, being more explicit about the procedures around how you're using it not only reinforces those things with the learners, but it's an advertisement about how awesome what you're doing is in the classroom to the administrator. Like I've actually seen administrators walk into a classroom when that's missing, and then they'll come over and ask me like, so what's going on over here? And then I'll explain it. But if the teacher would have just taken 30 seconds to 60 seconds and gone, hey guys, taking the time to do that housekeeping and explicitly give students direct instruction before you let them release is critical. And I think it can be really helpful, especially in a more formal observation, to making sure some of those components are definitely there. Because remember, I don't want a walkthrough or a formal observation to be a show, but there are components that you need to make explicit when you're doing things in front of other people. And it's not going to harm the students, so it's only going to benefit the observation as a whole.
And this kind of ties into that, and Candace has mentioned a couple of times, I feel like I'm hearing Dave Schmittou in Candace right now of one of the best ways that you can support your educators and make sure that this is going well and be in tune with it is get out of your office, get into classrooms. Easier said than done, always, of course, but getting in there to really get a feel for, and this is going into what you're saying, so you can see all these things happening so that now you're learning, okay, this is what this looks like. This is what I look for. This is now how I see areas that I might be able to support her or him because I understand what I'm seeing because I've seen the progression. So getting into classrooms, I think, is huge. Dave, actually, speaking of Dave, mentioned that for admins, there's a key there that's really is to just point to the observation rubric, and I think he's touching on when sharing to potentially to the community. Looking at the observation rubric that is utilized by the state and aligning this. And this is something that we've actually done for you.
Yeah, we've done it for you.
So we have this. So over at teachbetter.com/the grid method, there are alignment guides that show how it aligns to things like we have it for, obviously we're in Ohio. So we have the OTES in Ohio, Marzano, Danielson, and I think there's possibly a few others. So that is really important, right? So if you're, and I think that speaks to a larger one, what Dave's saying is, and you kind of touch on this, speaking to your community, knowing what's important to those stakeholders and showing how the changes that your teachers or your teacher or your district or whatever are making align to and support those things that are important to them is the key, which is what Chad said in like 15 different ways today, which is focus on the purpose of these things, not the name, the grid method. Focus. And when Chad said earlier, like, I don't care if you're doing a grid method as long as you're hitting the outcomes and doing the things you want to do. Like that is 100% true for us. Like that's what we focus on. I think that's really important through all of this. Go ahead, Chad.
I also think to that point, I think Dave just kind of supported this as well, is like ask questions as an administrator before you condemn anything. Like
yes.
assume best intentions on the part of the teacher until they prove you wrong. Right? Like as an administrator, as a leader in any capacity, Like we do this even internally on the team. Like Jeff, you and I, this is a little bit behind the curtain. Like when you and I argue, I think one of the reasons we work so well together is because we both always assume that the other person has the best interest of Teach Better, of whatever the client is or the service we're providing is, in the back of our minds. Yeah. Even if we are kind of posturing from a different tone or stance or idea, we both agree kind of cohesively, whether it's on purpose or just kind of magically happens, that we are both fighting for the same objective and the same cause. I think administrators have to have that same mindset of, I'm going to assume that you have the best intentions for our students, for our school, and for your classroom or the district in mind when you are making decisions, until you prove otherwise, right? Until you can prove that those things are being driven by selfish intent or any other malice that hopefully doesn't exist in the educational system. But like, let people prove you wrong is like a really good basis for any administrative conversation. When you approach a teacher and you have concerns, start with questions and that clarify those concerns before you attack what was happening in the classroom. Because you will get so much context by asking a question, but if you attack something, you're going to get a guarded adversary versus a productive partner in the conversation, right?
Yeah, and I think a key piece to that is the way in which and the types of questions that you ask should be clarifying what's going on and the purpose, not basically just stating your concern in the form of a question, which I think we all as humans commonly do. But you said it specifically, like clarification. So asking the questions of trying to understand what's going on and why they're doing it, not from with that baseline assumption of they're doing it because it's right. I don't understand yet, so I need to ask this question. Not I don't think they're doing it right, so I want to see if I can catch them. It's I must be missing something because I don't quite see this. So can you educate me, because I'm clearly wrong, because I know you're doing what's right for students. Because now you have someone who's like, oh, okay, like Chad's coming to my room and wants to understand this, and now I explain it. Now, if there is an issue, like you said, we're partners in this conversation. Now we're addressing an issue, not with the system or the process or the way we're executing versus an issue with me and you. And I think that's a very different, it's a subtle way of approaching, but it's very different than coming in with loaded questions that are trying to kind of get you because you already believe that you're right and they're doing it wrong. And that you mentioned that baseline assumption that they are doing it because they believe it's what's best for their students. Go ahead. You had more there.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to, are you creating a collaborative partner in the goals that you have, or are you creating an enemy, right? Like the easiest way to create an enemy is to attack someone or to attack what they're doing. The easiest way to create a partner is to create a productive relationship where you ask questions for the good of the greater good. And so, for example, if I'm a principal and I walk into a room and I see two kids talking and I don't think they should be talking, I might make a note of that and go, I didn't really like how those two kids were talking. But instead of going, I didn't like how those two kids were talking, I'm going to dock you some points off of that. I'm going to make a note and I'm going to go, hey, I noticed that Susie and Bobby were talking in the back. Do you know why they were collaborating? Could you clarify why they might be collaborating? Or was that something that we should maybe address next time? And then maybe they shouldn't have been talking, and it's a management support that the teacher needs to like, hey, maybe monitor that a little bit better. But maybe the teacher the day before had them start on 2B on the grid, which is a partner activity, which requires them to talk. And now that you have that context, there absolutely should be talking and supporting and working together, right? And the only difference between those two things is that one of those answers has context and the other doesn't, right? And so I always ask those clarifying questions, even if it takes a little bit longer, because that's, once again, creating the space for innovation to occur. When you ask questions, you're letting the teacher defend their practice or support their practice from their own lens versus dictating your lens onto them and going, well, I didn't like this, so it doesn't make sense.
Dave's saying all good data should lead to questions. If you have data that you think leads to a judgment, odds are the data is incomplete. Ooh, that's powerful. That's go figure. Dave coming in hot this morning. I love it. And by the way, we argue. What are you talking about? Like, you and I don't argue. Like,
Oh, you weren't aware that those
I wasn't aware that we argue. Chad and I argue so much.
Me yelling was probably an indication.
When someone new comes on a team, I remember when Ray first started working with us, we had to like warn her. And we're like, don't worry, like we still love each other. It's cool. There's this underlying, and you cut that like I've always said we have this underlying level of respect and trust, and that you were talking like that is key between you and your teachers, your colleagues, everything like that. So I love it. So we don't argue anymore though. It's easy going now at this point. We argued yesterday or 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Anyway,
but there's also like, but this is a really great conversation from an administrative lens, right? Like seeing argument is always a bad thing isn't necessarily a healthy way to look at any relationship, right? Like if you're arguing because you're both fighting for the greater good, like if I'm a teacher and I'm arguing with my principal because I think what I'm doing is better for kids, that's a great argument to be having.
Yeah.
And if we always view argument as being negative, arguments will stop and so will progress. Like no one's ever made progress without disagreeing. Like no one's ever been like, hey, we should change the world. Yeah, we all agree how that should happen. Let's go. Like that's never happened in the history of the human race.
Yeah.
Right? Like argument, dissonance, discordance, conversation, disagreement is critical to progress. And if we don't provide the space for that to happen with the best of intentions, then we're literally like, you might feel good as an administrator because you're not arguing with anybody, but what you're really doing is you're stalemating your entire school, right? Like you're literally stagnating any progress that's happening because everyone's just doing what they're told and putting their head down, whether they're happy about it or not.
Yeah, it's the kid. It's your teachers now. The kid in the back of the room with their head down. While that's a great obedience, it's not actually getting them anywhere, right?
Yeah,
I'd almost argue that if you're an admin and you're never arguing with any of your teachers, like there might be not. And again, focus on arguing in a positive light. Like you're not having
maybe the
arguing might not be the best word, right?
Has a wrong connotation, right? Like,
it's the conversations where you're.
If you're never disagreeing with anyone,
if you're never disagreeing, that's a great word, right? If you're never disagreeing,
that should be a red flag.
And having that constructive, I don't even want to say criticism, but constructive. I want to almost go to like Dave's, like constructive questioning and conversations. You're just stalemate. You're just keeping the peace, and you're not actually going anywhere. I think it's super important.
actually been guilty about this as well, right? You like there have been times where I don't speak up because I don't want the conflict, but then like later on, I'm like, I wish I would have spoke up.
Because it just boils in and becomes an issue.
It gets worse and worse and worse, right?
Yeah.
Versus Dave, someone she had a course about crucial conversations.
I think we just released one of those.
I think we did. From that standpoint, though, like we have to be okay as any organization, as a school, as a team, as a district, for pushing back when we disagree. If we create only compliance, we're limiting the voices in the room, right? So when we do that, the person that's sharing that voice, whatever position they have, principal, curriculum director, superintendent, they might assume that because they're not hearing anything disagree, that they are correct, when hearing an alternative idea might be what they need to rethink their own statements or their own ideas. Because if you don't ever have the conversation, no progress will be made. So you only know what you know.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know. And we have to kind of preserve that as leaders in education to move the needle forward. So if we shut everybody out and go my way or the highway, or we create a culture that supports that, we're hurting the overall progress of the organization, whatever that may be.
Yeah, that's 100%. Yeah, I love it. So we're almost to 10 minutes here. I got two questions, two more I want to throw at you. One is, so think it through. So the most common pitfalls or red flags that an admin can be looking for in classrooms or from the teachers that kind of signifies that possibly the teacher is either not running the framework properly or really just struggling with the implementation of it. So like obviously like an admin knows how to see if a teacher is just like struggling in general or having a hard time. The data can show that, stuff like that. But like since the grid method already looks different, it could be a little more difficult, especially early on, to do that. So what are some of the things that are potential pitfalls, red flags that might be happening in a classroom that an admin can look for explicitly early on, and as the teacher's progressing and learning, to best support that teacher as they're trying to implement this, as they're stumbling through and stuff?
So actually, I have a giant red flag, and this kind of encompasses a lot of different things. And the biggest red flag that I see as as a coach for the grid method, but that administrators, I tell them to look out for like a hawk, is passive acceptance of student compliance to the framework. So what I mean by that, and I said it in a really convoluted way, I apologize, is what I mean by that is the grid method is really good at training students how to work self-paced. Once you have all the systems in place, it is possible to say, everybody get out your grid, get to start working, and I'm going to put my feet up at my desk and let it just run itself. Just because that's possible, though, doesn't mean that's what should happen. Passiveness on the part of the educator is the number one red flag I see in grid method classrooms. Just because it's possible doesn't mean it should happen. I want to say, because your students are able to work at their own pace and get the content they need to be successful, what else can you do as an educator to support, push them, grow them as a learner? Are you pulling small groups? Are you checking to make sure they're on task? Are you checking in and signing them off and giving regular, consistent feedback on their learning goals and their growth? Are you facilitating learning in the classroom? Because the biggest danger to this is that this is still just a piece of paper. As magical as it may seem, it's a bunch of boxes on a piece of paper. This can't teach a classroom. We need educators to do that. And we cannot remove the educator from the practice of education. The minute that happens, we are losing everything that makes the grid work. And I tell educators this all the time. You should be working harder than ever when you're running the grid. You should be getting way more for that work that you put in. And we've had teachers say, I am exhausted, but it was worth it. I've always been exhausted, but it's more worth it now because I'm getting the growth that I should from the work that I'm putting in. But if you're going to sit back and let the grid do the work, that's a huge red flag. Like, sirens should go off if no intervention's happening. No conversations are happening. And funny enough, some principals look for quiet classrooms. A silent grid method classroom scares the crap out of me. No joke. Like, that scares the living daylights out of me to no end, because I said, oh no, I have allowed something that can create a passive environment for learning. And we want every environment, whether you're a teacher or a student, to be as active as possible, because only when we participate in the process of learning does it become effective. So if there are no active participants, that's a problem.
I was hoping that you'd go there, and I thought you might, because I just, so often we have figured out that the best grid method teachers, the ones that are running it most effectively, say that they're exhausted. They're working hard. They say, I'm working harder than I ever have
in the classroom.
But the key to that statement is, but it's worth it because I'm seeing the result. I feel like I accomplished a lot today versus, so it's not just exhaustion. It's, I'm not even necessarily exhausted. I work so hard because I'm moving, right? I'm moving all to each individual student. I'm doing actually more teaching one-on-one and bouncing around more than I ever have. We see this all the time with educators who are rocking it.
Or they'll say, I know more about where my kids are and what they know than ever before. Things like that.
Exactly. Right. Yeah, exactly. Versus probably some of the worst grid method classrooms we walked into is ones that are like, I don't know why they're not getting it, because they just kind of set it down, right?
Or they'll say things like, that kid's on Netflix back there. And I always like, it irks me because I'm like, what would you normally do if that's happening? Like, I have a concern about this, right? Like,
and that's one of those muddy things that, like, that's not a grid method thing. That's
not a grid method thing. Right? That is exactly. a classroom management thing.
All right. So I want to touch on this, and I might ask one more if we have enough time, but I want to touch like specifically to what we have as a team, the resources that we have that are out there for administrators looking to better understand the grid method and how to support their staff. Where can we point administrators to? And I have a list if you don't.
Sure. So you can give the specific list. I'll give some of the things that I'm thinking about off the top of my head. But like one of the best ways, if you have like actual, like real-time things you need to talk through, is our administrator mastermind. Like
yes.
they literally meets every Tuesday. We have topics that we talk about, but like it's also it's a great forum for other principals that do this work, that run this in their schools, and things like that, or at least believe in the philosophy enough to support the conversation. So like Admin Mastermind's a good live interaction, completely free, open space to have those conversations. But we also have a ton of things like alignment guides. We have a Danielson framework alignment. If you're in Ohio, we have an OTES framework alignment 2.0, by the way. We have FAQs for students, teachers, and administrators, all developed. So like a lot of these resources are already there for you to access. And a lot of times people will start to remake some of these things and then realize that we have them and go, oh, I could have saved an hour of my time because I was busy answering these questions. But the number one resource is our team itself. Literally, just reach out. This is what we do, everyone. We literally help people do amazing things in schools and districts. So if you're struggling reaching out to myself or whoever your contact is on the team that's working with your staff, or whichever trainer you're working with, info@teachbetter.com, like reach out and let us support you. Like it's what we do. And this is what we live for, is to help. So you're never bothering, you're never bugging. But additionally, we also have an amazing Facebook group that you can like connect with educators from across the country. And we have a brand new crop, by the way, amazing ambassadors that also have a wealth of information. And these are people we trust with the work that we do, that are in the trenches right now, either using the grid method. There's administrators in that group, but there's also other teachers that you can connect your teachers with. So if your math teachers by themselves trying this, you can go find in one of the Facebook groups or even the ambassador group, someone for them to connect with so that they can have a planning buddy, right? You're never alone in this journey. And if you are alone, you're choosing to be, because we have 4,000 ways to connect with our family that can help you support this work.
I love it. I know Bree's dropping some. I believe that's Bree dropping.
Sorry if I missed anything. I'm sure
in the Facebook group there. So a couple of them won. So I'm going to go through. So you mentioned the administrator mastermind every Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. Run by Joshua Stamper. I saw him in there somewhere. That's at teachbetter.com/mastermind. The FAQs and the alignment guides, all that's over at teachbetter.com/thegridmethod. But there's also online courses over at teachbetteracademy.com. There's a free grid method course. There's a deeper dive one in there that are geared towards teachers. But as an administrator, it can be really powerful to go through that. There's also a lot of administrator focused courses over there as well. And then the Facebook group, if you're not watching in the Facebook group right now, I know some people are, you can either search Teach Better Team on Facebook and you'll see our page and our group come up. Or if you go to teachbettergroup.com, it'll redirect you to that. You just request to join. There's a couple questions you have to answer real quick. And then our team will get you approved and in really, really quick. And then you mentioned, of course, the team. So reaching out, teachbetter.com, reaching out. And whether you're working with us or you have a contact on the team or whatever, just reach out to the team. And we're here.
And realizing that we do go to schools is also critical, right? Like one of the primary things the team does that some people are unaware of is we literally train people how to do the grid method and a lot of different things. Like that's a lot of the work we do is going into schools, doing small group sessions, whole staff sessions, introduction sessions, full workshops, visits, observations. Like you can easily bring the team to your building, your school, your district to do the work that you need done. So it doesn't even need to be all on you. If you're like, hey, we have a PD day coming up, we can literally come and help you solve whatever problem you have.
We can come in person or virtually. And actually, it's funny. I'm glad you said that because like right at the beginning, you talked about how you're not usually on the screen, live screen. And I was going to say something I didn't because you kept going on some other things that were more important. But I was going to note, like, it's not because you don't want to be on live stream. It's because typically you're in a school.
I'm gone. I'm working
all the
schools.
time, right?
Yeah.
So, you guys are out there so much, and that's the same with like you might not see Dave as often anymore because Dave's in schools all the time, right? So, like Ray's out, like we have people out all the time, like that. Like Chad's point, like that's what we do. Like it's what we live for. I love how you put that. So utilize that. We're in less than a minute here, Chad. So we're going to wrap up. Everything's over at teachbetter.com. And if you want to go specific to the grid method, teachbetter.com/the grid method. Please continue sharing, reach out to us, get in the Facebook group, ask additional questions, and continue to follow. This conversation does not need to end today just because our live stream is done. But I'm super happy and thankful for everyone who's joined the last couple of days with Chad, and huge shout out to Blair for an amazing job preparing for the grid and working through that on Tuesday. Chad, I want to shout out you, who's someone who's not on live streams very often, for a successful 3 days of live streaming. Yeah. So appreciate that a whole lot. Appreciate everyone who's dropping the comments and going for it. And someone earlier, I apologize, I'd have to flip back through to figure out who it was, but someone mentioned that they're in their first year of the grid. So like, congrats, that's awesome. And someone is like getting ready to, Janelle may have been you earlier, but someone else like is getting into the grid now. And that is awesome. And I want you to know, Candace Miller's been popping in the comments a lot. She's been running it for forever now. So when Chad talks about those people, like these are the amazing people that are in this community that you can connect with. If you don't have someone that's local, get in the Facebook group, get connected to the team. So Chad, brother, always fun when we get to hang out on.
I know, man.
And when we don't argue in front of everyone, that's really great. So
next time we should just have a live stream of us arguing.
We should just.
I think that people would.
All right. So what we're gonna do is
a cage match.
Next time you and I have an argument, I'm gonna go. Wait, stop. We're gonna jump in and we're gonna go live. Here's the crazy thing: if you've ever seen Chad and I argue, we could do that because Chad and I can go from like at each other's throat to like, hey, how's your kids? Like that, and I, not to go too deep, but that's because of that mutual understanding and respect. But like. That could be entertaining. We could have a cage match. We have to bring someone in to like ref it. We'll bring Dave Schmittou in.
Someone said Ray would not approve this, but Ray's just as good at that as we are now. Like she's
you want to
into those conversations.
Chad
Ray's actually the champion of arguing with good intention. Like she's like the master.
The only reason Chad and I might argue more with each other is because we typically lose when we argue with Ray. So like we don't do it as often. But no, yeah, we'll have the three. She'll be the ref, which will just make it like chaos. It'll be like in WWE where the ref turns on one of the guys. Like it'll do that. We'll have tables and ladders and chairs. It'll be great. Anyway, we're off topic. We're gonna go. You have an amazing rest of your winter break, your holiday break, and spend the time with the family. And again, just reach out if there's anything we can do. We appreciate you. Take it easy.